The face of our continent, before man came into the picture. Nature in balance, as they say. But that suggests something fixed and static. It wasn't. It was a community of creatures maintained by tensions and change. From the forest and prairie of the south to the tundra of the north, it was a natural living community, all bound together in an intricate, ever-changing web of which one strand of life supported others and was in turn supported.
The wolf in this wild land with bison and caribou lived down through the ages in forest and plain. They all lived together, each in his own way. The moose and the bison, the deer and the caribou, they fed on the forest, the grass and the moss. But the way of the wolf when he needed to eat was to track down his prey, had to have meat. By living in nature, each in his own way.
About 20,000 years ago, the first man showed up in North America and got into the act. But his technology was pretty primitive, and there weren't ever a great many Indians, and he killed only to supply his own needs. He didn't really change the life of the land, he became part of it. But another bunch was on the way, with power to really disrupt the shifting balances of nature.
They were off to make their fortune in the woods of Canada. In the heart of that great land, the beaver were at play. Now the beaver had a special coat, and for it they will pay a fortune for a bale of skins in London far away. So the trader tells the Indians, come all you unto me, just bring me all the skins you can to ship across the sea. The reason for this trade is that over in London town, a hat of felt from beaver pelt can bring a gent renown.
But before the beaver was totally eliminated in Canada, such headgear became old hat, as they used to say. He was saved to become our national symbol by a whim of fashion. Some other species weren't so lucky, as the white man moved in to take over the continent. Usually it was accomplished with good sense and humanity and certainly heroic toil. But to some others it meant simply getting rid of whatever was in the way. In our part of the continent, we like to say it wasn't all that brutal. But the last Indian in Newfoundland disappeared over a century ago. The last passenger pigeon is long gone. And we've tried our very best to exterminate the wolf. Martin this day discovered a deer slain in the woods. There are wolves about. This is from a novel, Settlers in Canada, by Captain Marryat. He describes vividly the terror and hatred the pioneer felt for the wolf. For he had inherited the horror stories, legends of Europe. In North America, there were men who made a living as wolfers, the job to get rid of the critters. For though people regret the extermination of nice species like the passenger pigeon, few questioned the desirability of wiping the wolf from the face of the continent. In the early days, it was a hard job, for wolves are smart and wary, and the qualities that made them good predators made them hard to bring down. Except with poison. That was effective. Of course, what really endangered many species was simply our takeover of their natural territory. There's a notion that man's taking over is bad for wild animals, period. Not quite true. For the raccoons, it's been just great. Their population has multiplied like ours, because, of course, they're fond of garbage, and around some of our cities, raccoons have even become a bit of a nuisance. Creatures of the wild hanging around town, while we creatures of the town resort to every device and stratagem to get us as fast as possible into what's left of the wild. There aren't many Canadians who've actually heard a wolf howl, and fewer still who've ever seen one outside a zoo. But there's still some around. The ranch is in British Columbia. The rancher has laid a complaint with the conservation officer. There's wolves around. I'm not raising cattle to feed the brutes. Get rid of them for me. The wolf species was eliminated completely in the British Isles hundreds of years ago. In the United States, there are a few, in Michigan, Minnesota, Louisiana. In Sweden now, there are about 20 wolves still hanging on. The wolves have taken off into the woods, but they'll be back here. The kill was moose. The wolf was a menace in the old days on the open range. He didn't always discriminate between a stray calf and his natural prey. Man and wolf in competition. Man the hunter and wolf the hunter, after the same prey. In the distant past, man had to hunt to survive, like the wolf. Now, of course, for most hunters, it's a question of sport. The wolf's depredation. There it is. One less for us in the open season next fall. Look at the size of the brute. Indiscriminate slaughter. Waste. No closed season on the killer. With the skillful use of modern techniques, it's now within our power to win the war against the wolf once and for all. The wolf has a very bad reputation indeed. As infants, we learn about its devilish cunning and lust for blood, anybody's blood. And don't be too sure, kiddies, that you can trust your own grandmother. And his press notices have been generally poor, to say the least. From grisly fairy tale to red-blooded adventure stories, the wolf has been cast as the villain. It's kill or be killed, and he who conquers the beast is not just a hunter, but a victor. There was one nice legend about the wolf who suckled Romulus and Remus, but that was 3,000 years ago. Very few have put in a good word for him since. And judging by what they're saying about him these days, his image hasn't improved much.
I don't want any wolves around our hunt camp.
No, I don't hate wolves. I just hate what they're doing.
There are too many wolves now. I travel this country.
Too many wolves for what deer there is.
Clean up on it. What good are the wolves? What good do they do?
And they'll just clean out the beaver, too, the wolves will.
They just kill everything there is in sight.
They grow too fast. You leave them alone and they will overrun your country.
I'd like to know one good thing they do. They won't eat a deer after they kill it.
That the wolf will only kill the weak and the sick, that's an absolute lie, or the statement from secondhand from an ignoramus that never was in the booth. They kill to eat and then they kill for fun.
Goodness sakes, the country's running alive with them.
Ken Semanek is a biologist. On this day, he was heading into a lake in northern British Columbia. He's one of many people in various places studying the wolf in his natural environment. There was the killer. No panic. Just a mild curiosity about the intruders. A curious scene. The caribou, the prey, just dawdled along. And the wolf dawdled too. What's the real story of the predator and his prey? Detective story. First job to establish the identity of the victim. What can we find out about him? The bones tell the story. This victim was afflicted with a disease called lumpy jaw. He couldn't nourish himself. Another case. Saw up a leg bone. Examine. In this case, the marrow is red and runny. In a healthy animal, it's white, like lard. Verdict, fat reserves depleted. This victim must have been in the last stages of starvation. The food supply in this area had been pretty well browsed out. Trees broken off where the animals tried to get at it. Too many animals competing were destroying the source of their life. Verdict on the victims? They were generally the ones easiest to catch because they were past their prime. These caribou don't seem very concerned about the wolf in their midst. The wolf heads back into the woods to rejoin the pack. If we are to see him in action, predator and prey, we have to get north of the tree line. Not quite so desolate as it looks. Under the snow, there's vegetation, lichen, mosses, enough to support a chain of creatures. Biologists chose this somewhat inhospitable area to work, for this was a chunk of nature man hadn't touched. It is as it was. The wolves showed no fear of the strange intruders, but kept their distance. The Arctic wolf is similar to the timber wolf of the south, except for his lighter coat. The kill was caribou. The scrapping seldom amounts to serious injury. Nature has built an instinctive restraint. The victim is rarely another wolf. The biologists studied the pack and the life of this land for 2 or 3 months each spring for 4 years. Wolf research has been going on in Canada for a long time, though there are those who don't think much of it.
Well, they're still looking inside the droppings of wolf to find out what they're eating, and they've been doing that for 40 years. They still don't know what's in there.
The center of the story, of course, is food supply. What do they eat? When the ice pulled back here a few thousand years ago, the only vegetation that could find a foothold was lichen. Lichen isn't like grass. You chew up a patch of lichen, it takes up to 100 years to grow back. So the caribou have to keep moving. The wolf on Baffin feeds almost exclusively on caribou. Other creatures, raven, Arctic fox, finish up the leftovers. Heading up the trips to Baffin Island was Douglas Pimlett, professor of zoology at the University of Toronto. He studied wolves for years in the Ontario bush, but he never actually saw a wolf and his prey in action. The wolf, coming in from the right, breaks into a run. The caribou shift into high gear. No future in that. He'll have to bide his time until the odds are more even. A healthy caribou can usually outrun his pursuer. During the 3 expeditions, they did observe some actual killings, but the camera recorded only the usual futile chases. When they came back here in the spring of '69, there was nothing left to study. The pack had disappeared, perhaps wiped out during the winter by bounty hunters. The full story of the predator and his prey was unfolded elsewhere. Isle Royal, 210 square miles of wilderness. An island in Lake Superior, 15 miles off the mainland of Ontario. It's a U.S. national park, its wildlife unmolested, a biologist's dream. 40 years ago, there were perhaps 3,000 moose living on the island, but too much of the vegetation was being browsed out. The moose were starving. Moose, like deer and caribou, are natural prey of the wolf, but there were no wolves here then. One very cold winter, about 30 years ago, the channel between the island and the Ontario mainland froze over, and a pack of wolves made their way over the ice. Biologists have been keeping track of the situation so diligently that the wolves pay no attention to the research plane overhead. They've learned it's harmless. Dr. Allen is a zoologist from Purdue University. For him and his associates, the island became a kind of natural laboratory. A healthy bull moose may get up to 2,000 pounds, one of the most powerful animals on the continent. This bunch didn't seem to worry about the wolves approaching, just calmly noted the fact. The bull turns to show his intentions. Keep coming and I'll kick you to pieces. The pack leader came within 30 feet, but the show's over. Wolves are too intelligent to tackle a big, healthy moose. But to survive, the pack needs moose meat. That's their diet. So they wander off. They'll find something in their territory. On Isle Royal, this pack's territory works out at about 10 square miles for each wolf. They were constantly marking the scent posts, limits meaning other wolves keep out. Within that territory, there are some hundreds of moose. It works out that despite the prowess of the prey, they manage to make about 2 kills a week. By humanitarian standards, it sounds awful. The victims are most often the old and sick and defenseless, and sometimes youngsters whose mother isn't around to protect. But after 30 years, the standing in Isle Royal is 2 packs, plus several loners, about 22 wolves altogether, about 1,000 moose, and a healthy vegetation, a food chain that supports everybody. The legend that wolves take over and destroy everything in sight is beginning to die. The object is to keep track of where wolves go and make kills in bush country. George Kolonowski's receiver will get signals from a little transmitter he attaches as a collar around a wolf's neck. But first, catch your wolf. Kolonowski invited a local woodsman to go along and give him a hand in the operation. When he heard Kolonowski was going to handle a live wolf with just a forked stick, he said, "I'm not going near any proposition like that. You must be crazy." So far, George has handled altogether 20 wolves this way. No trouble. He could dope the alleged man-killer with tranquilizers, just to be on the safe side, but he doesn't bother. He's found the victim just freezes, remains passive, while he slips the radio collar around his neck. When George sets a trap, he removes one of the springs, so the leg won't be damaged. The crushing jaw of a wolf, the legendary foe of man. But he just lay there, frozen with fear, had to be prodded to realize he was free again. The legend that the wolf is a slavering monster who attacks humans dies hard. In fact, in Canada, there is one authenticated case. 1942. A railway section hand had a scrap with a wolf. He wasn't actually bitten, and a mighty good thing. The wolf had rabies. The legends are dying as we begin to understand the wolf's place in the scheme of things natural. Each pack has its leader. He's the one who carries his tail in the air, like a flag, the dominant male. And there's the other carrying her tail not quite so high, the dominant female. The rest of the pack are subordinates, the younger, the weaker, down the scale to the least. To watch wolves feeding isn't too pretty, but there's a ritual to it as formal as a state banquet. The kill has been made. The first ones to eat, the dominant pair. The rest just hang around. Their turn will come, when his lordship has well and truly dined. Nature's purpose. The dominant pair must keep in top condition. The welfare of the pack depends on them. The leaders finally had enough. Doesn't sound like a very humane society. It's not. His behavior is programmed by nature's morality, not ours. Now it's the turn of the subordinates. Bloody savages, but wolves rarely destroy wolves, their own kind, unlike the moralizers. The key to it is the wolf must live within a certain territory with limited resources, and he has no enemies to prey upon him, to keep down the numbers that must be fed. But nature looks after that. Usually only the dominant pair mate, and she comes into heat only once a year, in February. During this time, the subordinates get ideas, but the mating pair see to it that actual coupling doesn't take place. As soon as the frost is out of the ground in the spring, the female digs her den, or sometimes she cleans out an old one. The dominant male and the rest of the pack bring in meat from miles around for her to cache near the den. And one day her time is due. With most species at this stage of the game, the father's been out of the picture for months. But the wolf male is very much with it, very busy. The gestation period is 9 weeks. Litters range from 3 to 10. The pups are born at intervals of about 20 minutes. Wolves have been described as the ideal parents of the animal world. 3 weeks later. The chances of survival for this pup are slim. It's a tough world he enters. And if he does manage to grow to maturity, there's that $50 price tag on his coat and $25 or $50 bounty money on his head. Sometimes moves her pups to another den 3 or 4 weeks after birth. The reason for this isn't known for sure. It may be that the original den is located near water so she can easily nip out for a drink, and possibly that's not the best location to raise them when they're old enough to wander about on their own. At this stage, the father, and in fact all the rest of the pack, take part in raising them. The pups instinctively know that biting the corner of his mouth may make him regurgitate food for them. There may be a kill a couple of miles away. The male's been at it, and the easiest way to bring back a share for them is in his own stomach, half digested. The pups nurse for several months, but start trying out their teeth quite early in life. They spend a lot of time with the male. They just might get a free meal. If not, well, he's fun to play with. His patience seems inexhaustible. Growing up, getting interested in solid food. After about 3 months, they leave the den for good. They're ready to start ranging out into their territory, members of the pack. The numbers of the pack have increased, obviously, but this time next year, the pack won't be any bigger. One more perhaps, a couple less, about the same. Nobody knows exactly how it happens. Certainly some of the half-grown pups won't get through the winter ahead. Even the dominants must die and be replaced by younger and stronger. If the food supply stays constant, there won't be too many wolves in the territory, and there won't be none. A beautiful design of nature that didn't count on the arrival of man.
The wolf in the wild land with deer and with caribou lived down through the ages in forest and plain. They all lived together, each in his own way. They all lived together and all had their day by